This video was supposed to have a different title, but Wizards of the Coast just keeps being Wizards of the Coast. I'm Brad Wolf, and welcome to Dire Den, and this is a place where we talk about tabletop RPGs and D&D. I don't want to be covering depressive news stories on a regular basis. I don't want this to be a clickbait channel where all we do is talk about how the RPG industry is burning to the ground. I originally wrote the outline for this video before Hasbro announced they were laying off 1,100 people right before Christmas. So I considered just cutting this video and not making it at all. But it's really hard to ignore such a disappointing thing. As much as I don't want to cover depressing topics, it's hard to be a part of the D&D community and not acknowledge that Hasbro just laid off 1,100 people in a year where they had already laid off 800 people, and now that totals almost 2,000 people and almost 30% of their workforce. Now, I know this is what big corporations do, and it shouldn't be a surprise, but this is our game. D&D has been a part of my life since I was 10 years old. I love playing D&D. And I like 5th edition. I think it's one of the best versions of D&D. But it's really hard to celebrate the game that you love when the company responsible for making its core products are continuing to disappoint. So I can't in good faith not make this video. I had to address this year and how terrible it has been overall. So as much as I wanted to just put this video on the shelf and not finish it, I felt obligated to go through and review 2023 and the year of D&D. I wanted to call this video, Does WoTC Deserve the Hate? Or Have We Recovered from the OGL? I wanted to see a more positive spin come out of this year, 2023. But WoTC keeps making it hard to focus on the good parts of this game. I think the best thing I can do is be as objective as possible and call things like I see them. So we're going to go through the year of 2023 and we're going to label them the good, the bad, and the ugly. So this year started with the OGL debacle, where Wizards of the Coast tried to revoke the open game license, a license that has existed for years and has propped up the RPG industry ever since 3rd edition. And we have to call that one ugly. Thankfully, the community stood up and made a lot of noise and canceled DnDBeyond subscriptions, and that resulted in version 5.1 of the system's reference document being put into the Creative Commons license, and that felt like a real win for the community. So while we're keeping score, that was good. That was one of the good things the Wizards of the Coast did this year. And I think that's what feels so terrible about these layoffs, is there's nothing we as a community can do about it. Back then, people were able to make their videos, people were able to cancel their D&D Beyond subscriptions, and we felt like as a community, we had made a difference. However, as of right now, all this does is make it very clear that Wizards of the Coast is not its own entity, that Hasbro has control and Hasbro gets to make the decisions. And when Hasbro says to Wizards of the Coast, you have to lay off this many people, Wizards of the Coast doesn't have a choice. I think that's abundantly clear because Wizards of the Coast made a profit this year. Wizards of the Coast was successful this year, even in what was expected to be a relatively down year for D&D because of the new edition that's coming out next year. You don't really expect a game company to make a big profit the year before they release a new edition. But D&D still made money thanks to their contract with Larian Studios and Baldur's Gate 3, and Magic the Gathering made a good profit thanks to their Lord of the Rings content. So Wizards of the Coast actually made a profit, but Hasbro as a parent company lost money this year, and they were able to tell Wizards of the Coast, you're laying the people off, even though Wizards of the Coast was doing well. And that makes it abundantly clear that Hasbro is in charge and Wizards of the Coast doesn't have the autonomy that we wish they had. So we've established the OGL was ugly. 5th edition being moved into the Creative Commons, good. The other release from the beginning of the year was Keys from the Golden Vault, which overall was a good product. It was an anthology adventure based on heists, and it deserves to be in the good column. So the next on the list is OneDnD. They talked a lot about OneDnD and how it wasn't a new edition. They didn't want to call it 5.5. They didn't want to call it a new edition. Then what was it? What was the purpose? I think their marketing around OneDnD, I think we have to call that bad, because it wasn't good. Not in the same way that Pathfinder Remastered was good. Pathfinder came out and was very clear, we are doing Pathfinder Remastered. We're going to release 2 books in 2024 and 2 more books in 2025. Here's a clear path. Here's why we're doing what we're doing. We want to clean up the game. We want to make it a better game. We also want to get rid of anything that connects Pathfinder to the OGL. They were very clear and specific in what they were doing and how they were upgrading their game. And they gave it a clear and decisive name, Pathfinder Remastered. I think that was a good marketing strategy, and Paizo did a much better job of Wizards in that department. So I'm going to call the PR around OneDnD bad, because like I said, it wasn't good. And then along those lines were the Unearthed Arcana playtest documents. And you can go back and see some of my old videos where I tried to do dedicated reviews of each one of the playtests, and it just wasn't enticing. It didn't make for good viewer content. It was really kind of sad because there wasn't a clear direction to the playtest. They didn't have a direction in mind, or at least they didn't communicate a clear direction in mind as to what the playtest was trying to accomplish. It really just felt like they were just throwing a bunch of stuff against the wall to see what would stick. And again, I have to label that one bad because it was not good. It didn't really inspire us to get excited for OneDnD. At least I was not inspired. I was kind of frustrated by going through these playtest documents and constantly asking myself, well, this looks interesting, but what are they trying to accomplish? How can I review this and give it a rating on a survey if I don't understand your goal? What are you trying to accomplish by these changes? Those things were not made clear, and I think that's why we have to put the OneDnD playtest in the bad column. Next on the list was the Creators Summit. After the OGL debacle, Wizards of the Coast wanted to repair their reputation, so they invited a bunch of content creators, both Twitch streamers and YouTube commentators, to Wizards of the Coast, and then they also invited a bunch more to watch the event virtually. And they tried to present their new OneDnD and their new virtual tabletop to a bunch of content creators who were still feeling very angry about the OGL situation. And those creators were more focused on sharing their complaints about the direction of Wizards of the Coast than they were ready to be excited by the new things Wizards of the Coast was trying to pitch at that Creator Summit. And things apparently didn't go real well at the beginning, but eventually they turned it around, and Wizards of the Coast was able to have thoughtful discussions with several of those content creators. They also had technical difficulties with the folks who were trying to follow online. So overall, the Creator Summit, I think, had a net gain with the community, but the initial impact and the initial responses created a lot of bad press for Wizards of the Coast. So having more bad press fresh off the heels of the OGL debacle, I think we have to put the Creator Summit in the bad category. Because again, it didn't look good for Wizards of the Coast to have a number of people online shouting about how unhappy they were with this summit and this presentation by Wizards of the Coast. And the next on the list is the VTT, the virtual tabletop that Wizards of the Coast is developing. And because it was connected to that Creator Summit that didn't go very well, a lot of people were really down on the VTT. So again, because of the lack of trust in Wizards of the Coast, there was a lot of doubt about this VTT. People were concerned that it was going to be too demanding to be able to run on stream. People were concerned that it was just going to be a vehicle for microtransactions. It was just going to be a way for Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro to over-monetize Dungeons & Dragons. So again, that's something else in the bad column, because the VTT did not make a good first impression. Next, we had the D&D Showcase, and this was a time for Wizards of the Coast to come out and show off OneDnD and the VTT to all of us. But thanks to the disappointment of the Creators Summit, we had already gotten a lot of negative comments and a lot of negative speculation about OneDnD and the VTT. So by the time Wizards of the Coast turned around and tried to show it to the rest of us, there was already some bad blood there. And the D&D Showcase largely focused on brand recognition merchandise, like D&D's partnership with Minecraft or new plushie toys. So the D&D Showcase didn't really show off anything about D&D, because we already knew about the OneDnD playtest, and we already had kind of a sour taste in our mouth about the VTT because of the Creator Summit. So that showcase didn't really make a good impact on the community. So that's going to have to go into the bad column again. So other than that showcase, the other thing that came out in March of 2023 was the D&D movie. And overall, I'm going to put that in the good column because the movie itself was good. The problem, though, is it didn't make a lot of money. And whether that was because of timing and it coming out alongside the Mario movie that did way better than everybody expected, or because a lot of fans were still upset over the OGL issue, I don't know. I don't know why it didn't make money. I personally thought it was a good film and it was definitely worth seeing, and I went and saw it in theaters. In fact, I did a review of it on this channel. So the movie itself goes in the good column. However, let's look at the consequences of that movie not doing well and jump ahead to August. In August, Hasbro announced that they were selling EOne, the production company that they used to make the D&D movie. This was a production company that Hasbro bought for $4 billion. That's billion with a B, with the intent of making D&D movies and more G.I. Joe movies and hopefully a reboot of Transformer movies. Hasbro was expecting big things from EOne. But after the D&D movie didn't make a profit, Hasbro sold EOne for only $500 million with an M, $500 million. So they essentially lost $3.5 billion on that transaction. The side effect of that is that the D&D TV shows that were being produced by EOne also fell flat because they weren't promoted, they weren't advertised, they had already been filmed, so they are coming out now, but no one's paying attention to them. So I have to call this a big ugly. For Hasbro to buy a production company in 2019 and turn around and sell it only 4 years later and take a $3.5 billion loss. And you know what really rubs salt in that $3.5 billion wound? Is about the same time that Hasbro was negotiating the deal to sell EOne, Mattel and their Barbie movie was blowing up at the box office. So Mattel just proved that you absolutely can make real money off of toy-based and game-based movies. The next thing on the list doesn't have to do with Dungeons & Dragons. It has to do with Wizards of the Coast sending the Pinkertons to collect Magic the Gathering cards from a YouTuber. So imagine you're just a guy who's cracking packs of Magic the Gathering cards, being excited to be showing off the new run of cards, not realizing that this is the sequel, not the original release, and the sequel is not supposed to be out yet. So the original Magic the Gathering release was called March of the Machine, and the sequel was called March of the Machine Aftermath. So the Aftermath cards were given to this YouTuber by the distributor accidentally because the names were almost identical. They were both called March of the Machine and had very similar logos. Again, it was an honest mistake, and Wizards of the Coast way overreacted by sending a private security firm, again, the Pinkertons, the private security firm with the worst reputation in history, after this guy and intimidated the hell out of him and his wife. That was ugly. Next on the list is Spelljammer, and this is one of the most anticipated D&D releases probably since 5th edition came out. Spelljammer is an extremely popular campaign setting for Dungeons & Dragons, and it was just a disappointment. So we have to put this one in the bad column. So Spelljammer did not include spaceship combat rules, at least not ones that were really worth using. Spelljammer also had the lowest page count of any of the 5e campaign settings to date, and I don't even want to get into the whole Hadozi species stuff. Overall, Spelljammer just goes in the bad column. Next came Glory of the Giants, and it goes in the bad column for a few reasons. One, when Glory of the Giants released, we found out that Wizards of the Coast was raising the prices on their books. We also discovered that just like Spelljammer had the lowest page count of any campaign setting, Glory of the Giants had the lowest page count of any monster book so far. And to top it all off, Glory of the Giants had an issue with using AI art, which upset a whole lot of people. So Glory of the Giants lands in the bad column for multiple reasons. Next on the list is Baldur's Gate 3, and we finally get to put something in the good column. In fact, if we had a great column, this would be in it, because this is clearly the best thing that happened to D&D in 2023. Larian Studios knocked it out of the park. This is one of the best games all year. In fact, it has already won awards for the best game of the year, and critics are already calling it one of the best games of all time. It truly is a fantastic work of art and an amazing game, and it really has done a lot for Dungeons & Dragons. And next on the list is Planescape, and like Spelljammer, it is one of the most anticipated D&D campaign settings out there, and unlike Spelljammer, this one is actually good. This one goes in the good column, the page count is improved, the quality is improved, and Planescape is definitely a better overall product than Spelljammer was, so that's another win for WoTC. The next thing on the list was Playtest 6. Because this is the first time that OneDnD really feels like it has a clear direction. Playtest 6 did away with several of the innovative things they had experimented with in the earlier playtests and made it very clear that they weren't trying to make a new edition, that they are very much focused on just retooling, revising 5th edition to make a better version of 5th edition. Now, while this isn't what I wanted personally, it at least gave clear direction for the playtest and made it very obvious the direction that OneDnD was headed, and it finally started to feel like there was real purpose to the design changes they were making. So I'm putting Playtest 6 in the good column. Next on the list is Phandelver Below, the Shattered Obelisk. And while this is a remake of Lost Mines of Phandelver, Lost Mines of Phandelver is one of the most popular D&D adventures, and they expanded on it and they improved upon it, and overall I felt like this was a good product that Wizards of the Coast really delivered on. So Phandelver Below goes into the good column for me. Next on the list was a playtest packet that wasn't on the schedule. It was kind of a surprise. It was Bastions. And this is where they made it clear that they are trying to do some experimental things with the new revised edition of D&D, but they're going to be doing it as optional rules in the Dungeon Master's Guide, and they're not going to change the game itself significantly, but they're giving the DM options to add to the game. And honestly, I hope the DM's Guide actually has more things like Bastions, and it gives us more ways for a DM to customize their version of 5th edition. So Bastions is an add-on rule set that allows players to build their own home base, whether it's a wizard tower or a temple or a fortress. They're able to build a home base for the characters, and there's actually gameplay rules connected to these Bastions. Now, the next press release to come along for Wizards of the Coast in 2023 was that they were no longer working with Penguin Random House as a way to distribute their books. And I don't know really if this is going to be a good thing or a bad thing in the long run. Did Penguin Random House fire Wizards? Did Wizards fire Penguin Random House? We're not really sure if the decision was made because Wizards of the Coast just wanted to cut out the middleman and do more of their own distributorship, or if Wizards of the Coast is really planning on doing away with physical products in the long run as they build a more digital player platform. But for now, I'm going to put this one in the bad column because there was really more questions than answers with all of this. Now, the next thing probably wouldn't have been a big deal. It probably would have gone unnoticed if it wasn't for all of the other ugly things that happened in 2023 and all of the other things that are on the bad list so far. The Deck of Many Things product got delayed because the cards that they printed were not all the same size. You can't have a randomized deck to deal from if the cards are not the same size. That just doesn't work. So a lot of people spun this as, hey, here's a company that makes cards, Magic the Gathering cards, for a living. This is their bread and butter, making cards, and now they can't even get that right. So the delay of this product left a bad impression in a year where WoTC was really making a lot of bad impressions. Again, in a more normal year, this delay might not have been a big thing, but in the year where WoTC is struggling to make money and they've had a lot of ugly incidents in the press, this is one more thing that just made WoTC look bad. This next thing is in the good column for now. And I say for now because I don't know how this is going to impact the future of the game and the RPG community. WoTC announced that they will be selling third-party products through D&D Beyond. So if you're a D&D Beyond user, you can now get Critical Role's Tal'Dorei campaign setting and Layers of Etheris from Ghostfire Games, and soon you'll be able to get Dungeons of Drakkenheim from the Dungeon Dudes. I say this goes in the good column for now because we don't know what this will look like in the future. If D&D Beyond becomes the one-stop shop for all things Dungeons & Dragons, who decides which third-party creators get to sell their products on D&D Beyond, and what kind of contracts will those third-party creators get in the future? Right now, it seems like these contracts are good and there's incentive for these companies to sell their books through D&D Beyond. But what happens if the demand gets so high and D&D Beyond has such a large market share, and then they can police whose third-party products get sent out to the public via D&D Beyond and whose get left behind? That's something to be mindful of as we look at D&D Beyond's role in the RPG community for the future. And now we're into December, and you can see why this video that I started writing at the beginning of the month has taken me so long to finish because things keep happening in December that are worthy to review. Now, one of the biggest good things that happened in December was Pax Unplugged, and that gave us a good preview of what the new version of D&D is going to look like, and they did a good job of letting us know that it's not just going to be the new edition that comes out next year, but there's actually going to be some other adventures coming out next year as well. And so while we haven't seen much at all from the new Monster Manual or the new Dungeon Master's Guide, other than the Bastions that I mentioned earlier, Pax Unplugged told us that we are getting a lot of new monsters and a lot of higher CR monsters. They also promised that the Dungeon Master's Guide is going to be far more useful than the 2014 version. At PAX Unplugged, Wizards of the Coast also showed off the new VTT, which is much improved from when they showed it at the Creators Summit at the beginning of the year. And several people, including folks who are often critical of WoTC, like Stephen Glicker from Roll for Combat and Professor Dungeon Master from Dungeoncraft. So I feel like that's two reliable sources that are often critical of WoTC and their products, but they both had good things to say about the new VTT. So let's put PAX Unplugged in the good column for multiple reasons. There was some bad press surrounding PAX Unplugged because D&D social media sites published images promoting the new 2024 D&D Revised Edition, and they had a release date of May 2024. However, those images disappeared and were replaced with the exact same images without a date on them. And several people took that to mean that Wizards of the Coast was very disorganized and they couldn't even get their social media platform straight. And there's one more thing that didn't make Wizards of the Coast look good, so we're going to put that in the bad column, and that is Wizards of the Coast products being sold at the discount store Ollie's for next to nothing. This includes the Dragonlance board game that went with the aforementioned Dragonlance Adventure that didn't sell very well, and the D&D campaign cases. One case contains tiles for both Dungeons and Wilderness, and the other contains monster character pawns, and both of which are good products for someone who's just starting out in D&D and doesn't have a lot of miniatures to use, but wants something to use at the table to represent their dungeons and their dragons. And I don't think those products sold well just because a lot of people don't play in person and they use a VTT. These were products that originally sold for $40 to $50 each, and they were being sold at Ollie's for just a few dollars. People took this to mean that these products were failures and that Wizards of the Coast was desperate to unload these products. And, you know, sometimes that happens when you run a business. You just have to eat losses on certain products, and it's more cost effective to send them to a discount bin store than it is to destroy the product or continue to store it when you know you can't sell it. Again, I don't think this is that big of a deal, but we can't really put it in the good column. Now, one more good thing that happened here at the end of the year for Wizards of the Coast was the Playtest 8 packet. And this is one of the last of the playtests we're going to see for content that will be in the Player's Handbook. And surprise, it's really good. The Barbarian is good, the Monk is finally good, and they fixed a bunch of problematic spells from the 2014 edition. A lot of the Conjure spells are vastly improved from the 2014 edition to what's going to be in the 2024 edition. I was really pleased and impressed with Playtest 8. The only criticism I have of Playtest 8 is the Moon Druid subclass is still subpar. It still needs work. So if you're going to do your Unearthed Arcana survey regarding the Playtest 8, you might want to look at the Moon Druid subclass in particular and give your feedback. Because me personally, I think that is the weak spot of everything we've seen so far in the playtest material. I think we've steadily seen improvement with each of the playtest packet from Playtest 6 forward, and I think we are looking at a better version of 5th edition. So while I wasn't happy with the playtest packets that came out at the beginning of the year, the playtest packets that have come out for the second half of the year, and particularly playtest 6 and 8, have been impressive. So it's very clear that 2023 was not a good year for Wizards of the Coast. There's obviously just as many things in the bad column as there are in the good column, and the ugly column is just terrible. So what does this mean for me personally? I'm going to keep playing Dungeons & Dragons, and I will occasionally buy a Wizards of the Coast product. But I'm definitely nowhere near the level of consumer loyalty that I had back in 2014 and 2015 when I was buying everything Wizards of the Coast put out for Dungeons & Dragons. Back then, I was psyched and I was in love with the game, and I was eating up everything they had to offer. Over the last few years, I've purchased far less from Wizards of the Coast and far more third-party content and far more independent games. As you probably know from other videos, I play Shadowdark and ICRPG and Eldritch Hack. We have done a lot of different independent games this year, as well as playing 5th edition, and I only expect to be playing more and more independent games in the future. And for now, my players still love 5th edition, so we're still going to play that. And as far as the channel goes, I'm still going to make RPG content based around D&D. But like I've said before, D&D is much more than Dungeons & Dragons, the game made by Wizards of the Coast. When we say D&D, we are referring to a larger hobby that incorporates so many other games that are derived from a long history of D&D editions. And ultimately, D&D is our game. D&D is our community, and it includes so much more than just the products made by Wizards of the Coast, and this channel will continue to celebrate all good things that come from the D&D community, not just things that come from the Seattle company. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time in the Dire Den.